From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Soyini Gray. We begin with some breaking news from Venezuela, where the former Interior Minister Miguel Rodriguez Torres has been arrested in Caracas. In a communique from the Bolivarian government, said it had discovered plans by Rodriguez Torres for armed actions aimed at undermining the unity of the armed forces and the Constitution. It recalled that Rodriguez Torres had been dismissed from the government when it was found that he had links to U.S. intelligence agencies. To Grenada now, where the polls have closed in the general election. Over 60,000 people were eligible to vote, with a total of 45 candidates standing in for the 15 seats in Parliament. Polls opened at 6 a.m., but voters were seen making their way to their respective polling stations from as early as 4. The current Prime Minister, Keith Mitchell, and his new National Party have been the favourites to win. He was extremely confident of victory after voting, even though the opposition NDC, led by Nazim Burke, said they had given it their best shot.
Every message I saw from the opposition, including the leader, was about attacking people who is so bad and who is so wicked and who is so corrupt and so on. And to me, that's not the type of message that should come from a responsible political party, particularly the last time around. And a national television station, maybe you get away with it in the little villages when people not, the mass of people not listening, but not a national television. But that's the nature of the campaign so far, and I think that's why you most likely will see a massive victory for one side of the fence. I have no doubt in my mind.
We can say with confidence that we have done the work that we felt we could have done. I think whatever the outcome of this race, I feel assured that we gave it our very best shot. As you know, we were coming from way behind. We had no seats in the parliament, and we of course cannot match the ruling party with resources. So we had to fight a very smart campaign, a very strategic campaign, a very clean campaign. It's all about public confidence, and I think we did the best that we could have done in the circumstances.
The CARICOM Election Observer Mission was in Grenada to ensure fair and transparent elections. They will be making their findings public during a press conference on Wednesday. A team from the OAS mission in Grenada was at the National Stadium to witness the opening of a polling station there and visited several constituencies throughout the day. OAS Chief Nestor Mendez reported that people seemed excited to be voting. U.S. President Donald Trump has fired his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. Mike Pompeo, who is the current director of the CIA, will become the new Secretary of State. In a tweet, the president thanked Tillerson for his service and said Pompeo will do a fantastic job. Trump didn't give any specific reason for firing Tillerson. Tillerson has been in office for over a year and is currently on a 5-country trip in Africa. Political experts believe his removal may be linked to preparations for the historic meeting between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, which is expected to take place in May.
Rex and I have been talking about this for a long time. We got along actually quite well, but we disagreed on things. When you look at the Iran deal, I think it's terrible. I guess he thought it was okay.
Now we're hearing that Tillerson's ousting wasn't done in the most traditional of ways. Our correspondent Jorge Gestoso explains.
Rex Tillerson was caught by surprise by the firing of President Trump. He was supposed to bet on the long term, on the long run, in terms of his commitment to the Secretary of State position. According to different reports, he learned about his firing via Twitter, and most definitely in terms of politics, he was representing a moderate voice in the White House. He was in favor of the Iran nuclear deal, which President Trump is against. He was also having different troubles regarding other issues, and therefore President Trump is saying that there was having no chemistry or not enough chemistry or not ideal chemistry as he says that he does have with his replacement. We're talking about Mike Pompeo, the chief of the CIA. Precisely, President Trump is saying that he needed to have someone that was in exactly his wavelength in order to negotiate the next step that will be the possible meeting with the leader of North Korea. We're talking of Kim Jong-un. And President Trump said that he wanted someone like Mike Pompeo in order to be exactly in the same page. Worrisome in terms of where the foreign policy is going. We were knowing that there was disagreements between Tillerson and Trump, so much so that in a moment it was supposed to mention that Trump was a moron, something that he never officially denied, but also he didn't confirm. But most definitely there is another step in the White House that it continues to be perceived as a chaos, as chaotic, because in a permanent basis, most, at this point, around 20 of his close aides in the White House has left or been fired or being dismissed in the first years of presidency.
So who's the new U.S. Secretary of State? Mike Pompeo graduated from West Point Military Academy and served in the U.S. Army in Europe at the end of the Cold War. In 1998, he set up a private security company partially funded by the Koch brothers, who also helped to fund his election in 2010 as a member of the right-wing Republican Tea Party to the U.S. Congress for the state of Kansas. In November 2016, President-elect Donald Trump announced that he would be appointing Pompeo as the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. And replacing Pompeo as the director of the CIA is Gina Haspel. She's a controversial choice. From 2003 to 2005, Haspel was a senior officer overseeing the United States top secret RDI, or Rendition, Detention, Interrogation Program. It ran so-called black sites where terrorism suspects were subjected to enhanced interrogation techniques widely regarded as torture. She was present at the interrogation in Thailand of Abu Zubaydah, who was so badly tortured he was thought to be dead. Haspel later ordered the destruction of videotapes of his interrogation. U.S. President Donald Trump was in San Diego, California to inspect the border wall prototypes. The Trump administration has ordered the construction of 8 prototypes for an eventual border wall near Tijuana. The prototypes can be seen over the current border fence, marking the international border between San Diego and Tijuana.
So this was really a day where we look at the different prototypes of the walls. You've seen them, the media has seen them, and some work very well, some don't work so well. When we build, we want to build the right thing.
Now, ahead of his visit to California, hundreds of people protested. The rally was organized to show that the U.S. president is not welcome in California. Protesters say they reject Trump's racist and anti-immigrant rhetoric. They claim Donald Trump is making profit by criminalizing migrants.
Hacer esta visita a ese punto.
To make this visit at this area is like Trump is coming to have a laugh at Mexicans, at the country, at migrants, and to show that this presidential figure is having a tantrum and acting on a whim.
Now, our correspondent Pablo Perez is in Mexico City. He has the latest on the anti-Trump rhetoric on both sides of the border.
Well, it is today that Trump is going to visit the 8 border wall prototypes in California, in the state of California, close to the actual border with Mexico. It is expected to cause several demonstrations, both in the state of California, which is recognized as a sanctuary state, a state that is sympathetic with migrants, and which is mainly Democrat, so it's against Trump. And in Mexico's side, on the city of Tijuana, there's going to be several demonstrations going all over the existing border wall, which starts in Playas de Tijuana and goes all over the way to Tecate. And well, there are reactions also in the rest of the country, where
the general opinion is that the wall is, nonsense, and notwithstanding Trump's insistence that Mexico is going to pay for the wall, something that has been denied several times by Mexico's officials.
Well, we'll take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. In Colombia, the National Liberation Army, the ELN, has announced that President Juan Manuel Santos will resume peace talks in Quito, suspended since last January 10th. News of the talks come a day just after Colombians went to the polls. Unfortunately, it was an election marked with allegations of fraud.
The National Congress will continue to be ruled by political elites, traditional parties, and the right wing, according to Sunday's elections results.
There was no renovation in the Congress. Around 90% of the old one remains, but with little changes in the distribution of the seats, divided into parties Cambio Democrático, Cambio Radical, the Conservative Party, the Liberals, and the U Party.
The party Cambio Radical has been questioned after links tied many of its members with corruption cases and paramilitarism. They now have twice the number of members they had in legislative power. Uribe's party, Centro Democrático, will have more representatives too. Analysts warn that this might have serious consequences for the peace agreement.
This will mean a great obstacle for legislative development. For example, problems for integral agrarian reform or for guarantees and political participation processes, which are very important in the final agreement with the FARC.
Status quo stays the same for political elites, but alternative and progressive forces got stronger.
We had 26 Congress members from alternative sectors. Now we have 42, including the 10 places offered to FARC in the peace agreement. I think that this Congress has a lot of challenges. The first one in talking to the country. I think that Congress has always turned its back to the people. They betray in some way the expectations people had.
The new Congress has some real challenges ahead. They still have to apply more than 80% of the peace agreements and advance the justice, political, and integral agrarian reforms. The road won't be easy. An important sector of Congress is still controlled by corruption and controversial members.
Ecuador will elect the president of the National Assembly on Wednesday after the former president of the Assembly, José Serrano, was dismissed. Our correspondent, Denise Herrera, has the latest.
We are now in the National Assembly, where the political party Alianza País, in a press conference, made public their total support to the presidency of the Assembly, to the Assemblywoman Elizabeth Cabezas. Tomorrow will be the election for the presidency of the National Assembly. We should remember that the ex-president of the National Assembly was dismissed from his post when a recorded audio was published by the prosecutor Carlos Vaca Mancheno. He denounced a conversation between Carlos Polit, ex-controller of the Ecuador, and the president of the Assembly, José Serrano. He denounced conspiracy against him. So it's the only name we can hear for now for the presidency of the Assembly. We will be posted with more information back to you in the studio.
Still in Ecuador, the National Assembly voted almost unanimously to proceed with the impeachment of the former Ecuadorian Information and Communication Superintendent, Carlos Ochoa. The reasons for his dismissal include claims of irregularities in the Supercom, a regulatory body that presides over the Ecuadorian media. He's also accused of poorly overseeing the public channel, Gamma Vision. However, his supporters say he's a victim of political and media persecution.
My conscience is clean, having been completely honest and totally accurate. I haven't been called here for any corruption case, nor for illicit association, nor for anything illegal. No, my fellow countrymen, I'm telling you, I've been called here simply for carrying out the law, a law that was approved by this assembly.
A report by the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights accuses the Honduran government of the murder of at least 23 protesters during recent post-electoral demonstrations.
Excessive use of force by the Honduran army was one of the inquiries of the United Nations investigation, which also advises against security forces to repress protests.
Sobre la base de su observación, the OHCHR considers that security forces, in particular military police and the army, used excessive force to control and break up protests, including the use of lethal force against protesters.
Although the report takes into account the murder of 22 protesters and 1 police officer, human rights defenders believe the number of deaths is higher and must be acknowledged.
There
could be a problem as far as numbers go, about how many died. The problem is, who can we trust, since the government's account is unreliable?
Some of the deaths were targeted killings carried out away from protests and targeting community leaders who were part of the opposition alliance.
You can even say that these deaths could be construed as extrajudicial executions, something that had happened in our country during the 80s.
As far as Honduran authorities go, they've denounced these cases have been handed over to the public ministry, where the investigation will go on.
Public Ministry has taken over the investigation of 22 cases, and they will determine whether what's been discovered is proof enough to warrant further legal action.
Most of the killings happened in the north of Honduras, where protests against the government of Juan Orlando Hernandez lasted for entire weeks.
Peru has approved the extradition of former President Alejandro Toledo over his connection to the Odebrecht corruption scandal. The Supreme Court approved the request against Toledo, who fled to the United States after an arrest warrant was issued. The request will now need approval from U.S. authorities. Toledo is accused of receiving bribes of $20 million to allocate contracts to the Brazilian construction company, Odebrecht, while he was president in 2001.
This situation is based on foreign and diplomatic relations between both nations. If the executive power takes legal resolution about this case, the Foreign Ministry will send it to the U.S. State and Justice Departments, where a federal judge in California would order the extradition of former President Toledo, who has been accused by Peruvian justice of bribery and corruption.
Our correspondent in Peru has more details.
Peru's Supreme Court approved the request to extradite former President Alejandro Toledo. The document that says Toledo has committed serious crimes like influence peddling and asset laundering will be delivered to the Ministry of Justice for approval. Then, it will be sent to the United States to begin the extradition process. Toledo has also been accused of receiving $20 million from Odebrecht to give the company state contracts. However, many doubt how efficient this process would be, given that Kuczynski was the Minister of Economy in Alejandro Toledo's administration. The other question is how the United States would take this extradition order. The president of the judicial power, Duberlid Rodriguez, said that if the process continues normally, former President Toledo could be in Peru in less than a year. He would be taken to prison because he already has a preventative detention order due to investigations relating to this case.
Officials at the University of the West Indies Seismic Center say Grenada's Kikamjani underwater volcano is likely to erupt again within the next 24 hours. But there's no small chance of any disruption to the island or neighboring islands. UWI's Seismic Research Unit based in Trinidad hosted a Facebook Live event to answer questions and concerns about the volcano. The alert level remains at orange, which means an eruption is likely. But the biggest dangers are posed to ships who may travel within the 5-kilometer safety zone. The threat of a tsunami is unlikely. The advice now is for residents to remain vigilant and listen for alerts.
It depends on the size of the event. Given the kind of size of events you had in the immediate past, that area that we described is correct. So even northern Grenada would not be affected directly. If there is a big enough sort of eruption, if there's an explosive eruption, it's possible that explosive eruptions could cause material, fine fragments of ash, little blocks, to actually reach as far north as the North Coast.
An ice bridge has broken off from the Perito Moreno Glacier in Argentina's Patagonia region. But you can't blame climate change for this, because this is part of a cycle that happens every few years and attracts thousands of tourists. The arch broke off late on Sunday. Chunks of ice are expected to fall within the next few days. The last rupture was in 2016. Time now for another short break, but join us again after another look at what our multimedia colleagues are doing.
In the last hour, the news has filtered through to this community that Bobby Sands has died after 66 days of hunger strike.
I declare that Bobby Sands has been duly elected to serve as a member for the third constituency.
Welcome back. Russia has asked for samples of the alleged chemical that the UK claims was used to poison former Russian double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter. That's after UK Prime Minister Theresa May gave Russia 24 hours to clarify its involvement in the poisoning of the duo. Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, has denied any responsibility. He says the UK is violating the Chemical Weapons Convention if it doesn't provide the samples.
So, before issuing ultimatums, to report before the British government within 24 hours, it is better to follow your own obligations in accordance with the international law, in this case, with the Chemical Weapons Convention.
Now let's have a look at some of the other stories making headlines around the world.
A suicide bombing claimed by the Islamic State group hit UAE-backed forces in the city of Aden. At least 10 people were confirmed dead and 30 injured. Several buildings and cars parked nearby were severely damaged. Thousands of small shoes were placed on the ground in front of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., one pair for each of the estimated 7,000 children who have died from gun violence since the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in 2012. Called Monument for Our Kids, the demonstration is part of a far-reaching effort to pressure Congress to pass additional gun control legislation.
These are shoes that should be worn by children running and playing, and instead they're empty soles. And that's really the point. We're bringing to Congress's doorstep the terrible, heartbreaking tragedy of their inaction on gun violence.
South Korea's National Security Office head suggested Russia could take part in processes that would make a turning point in resolving the crisis in the Korean Peninsula. He said the Korean crisis should be resolved by peaceful means.
And just before we go, let's take a look at the close of polls in Grenada's general elections. The polls have been closed for just over 2 hours, but early results show an early lead for the new National Party led by Dr. Keith Mitchell. Final results are expected around 9 or 10 p.m. local time. And that brings us to the end of this news brief. So for these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Sweeney Gray. Thank you so much for watching.
The evidence is well organized. It reveals the stratagems that the power uses to control the system, both resistance and dissidents.